The Colin Wallace story was one that I was very familiar with in the 1970s and in the 1980s. As the former Colin Wallace and his confreres played out a deeply destabilizing role against the Labour government of Harold Wilson, whom I knew well and about whom I spoke of these matters in very great detail, and also in the role of the British state in committing very serious crimes, including murder, against Irish people in the 6 counties of the northeast of Ireland. Michael Oswold is an independent documentary filmmaker of note, has produced a film about Colin Wallace, the man who knew too much. Take a look at this.
Good evening.
Colin Wallace.
Colin Wallace.
Colin Wallace had fractured Mr. Lewis's skull with a karate-style blow after he was accused of having an affair with Mr. Lewis's wife. He hid his friend's body in the boot of his car and later dumped it in the River Arun.
He says he was the victim of an MI5 dirty tricks campaign.
Colin Wallace repeated his claim he was framed by MI5.
In Northern Ireland in the 1970s, Wallace claimed he was an intelligence officer. Wallace alleges he became involved in a black propaganda campaign by the security services.
He accused MI5 of running a dirty tricks campaign against politicians.
Are you apprehensive about how you will be portrayed in the film?
And you want an answer to that?
Colin Wallace has been dismissed by the authorities as a Walter Mitty character, a man whose allegations were fabrications.
Well, the man who knows not too much, but definitely enough about Colin Wallace and the circumstances in which he found himself is, of course, the great filmmaker, Michael Oswold, who joins me now. Michael, thanks for coming on the show. Kindly describe, more succinctly than I was able to do, who was Colin Wallace, what did he do, and what did they do to him?
Hi, George, and thank you very much for inviting me on the show. It's really a great pleasure.
Welcome.
Yeah, so Colin Wallace was a British military intelligence officer who was right at the heart of psychological operations and the spreading of fake news in Northern Ireland in the 1970s. And he ended up questioning the legality of one of the campaigns that he was involved in, specifically the one that you mentioned about the targeting of British mainland politicians. And as a result of that, sections of the intelligence apparatus, the UK intelligence apparatus, turned against him, and he ended up being made redundant, and he became a whistleblower. And after that, he ended up being accused of a murder, and he was convicted for manslaughter, and he got 10 years in prison. And when he came out of prison, the authorities were claiming that he had never worked in intelligence, that he was a Walter Mitty character. And so he had to start right from the bottom to try and clear his name. So that is kind of the background of the film. It's an absolutely incredible human story. And I think also Colin Wallace is really an incredible human being with an incredible amount of perseverance.
Perseverance, for sure. That doesn't mean he's not a Walter Mitty, though. How persuaded were you by the end that he was on the level?
Well, I was actually very much persuaded that he was on the level. Of course, in the beginning, when I first contacted him, I had only read this book by Paul Foote, which was called Who Framed Colin Wallace. So I didn't realize that he had actually been cleared of the manslaughter. but he has been cleared. And of course, I think that there are questions you can ask about, was he running his own kind of campaign to try and clear his name? And I'm sure he would have used his experience, that he accumulated when he was working in psyops to try and clear his name. But in general, I was very much convinced of his innocence and that he is a genuine person. I mean, what is your opinion?
No, as I say, I was at Private Eye for a long time. Paul Foote I knew well. I was entirely persuaded by Paul Foote's book on him, but I never met Wallace, and you have. So I was interested really in your take on that. Let's go back to the 1970s and about the things that I know through my connection, which was relatively deep. I used to regularly call on the late Mr. Wilson in his rather gloomy flat behind the cathedral in Westminster, and we'd talk about these times when it's now quite clear, there's no paranoia here, that the British security services, or sections of them, were trying to overthrow the elected Labour government led by Harold Wilson. And many of the things that happened in the 1970s, like the Swiss francs that mysteriously ended up in a bank account that he'd never opened, of Ted Short, the Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party at the time, like some of the other scandals that tried to suck and draw Harold Wilson down. I'm in no doubt whatsoever that these dirty tricks operations happened, and Colin Wallace was involved in them, wasn't he?
Yes, he was involved in them. I think in terms of the targeting of UK politicians, I go into that a little bit in the film, but not too much, because my understanding is that Colin Wallace was merely using some of this information in his briefs. So the army had a problem with politicians in Westminster for a number of reasons. One of them was, I think, the shoot to kill policy and things like that. So they weren't happy about, and the Wilson government was, I think, also talking to the IRA. So there's a couple of things that I think the army and the intelligence services thought, they're acting a kind of against what our policies is and how we think this situation should be resolved. Now, I don't go into that too much in the film because it's something that you can't really measure it. It's something that happened, but we can't measure what impact it really had. I think what is really interesting about the film is that it kind of shows you how you create a fake news campaign and how you spread that into the kind of media and into reality, that essentially you can take or invent stories from scratch that have, there's no piece of actual factual information there, and it can be accepted as fact after, it's published in the newspapers. And information policy, the department in the Ministry of Defence that Colin Wallace worked for were very good at that. And so I think the value of this film is it kind of shows us at a time when the world was simpler, when fake news was spread mainly through newspapers, how it worked. And of course, today, the world is much more complex. We have the internet, we have social networks, and sometimes, it's difficult to see, where is all this information coming from and how is it moving? And here we have an example of a person who was right at the center of creating these fake news campaigns in a kind of, and is basically telling us, how he did it.
Does the film go into the use of sexual blackmail in Northern Ireland to suborn, to influence, to potentially destroy, to blackmail Northern Irish political figures?
Yes, it's also mentioned. I mean, the film mentions the kind of, Clockwork Orange, the Wilson plot, and it also goes into Kincora. You know, it goes into these kind of very dark areas, but I don't know if it really, if you could say, oh, it sheds new light on those areas. I think the value of the film is really much more about, you know, how fake news in general is created and is spread.
I've got a call from Hong Kong, if you'll stay on the line, because it's from someone who met Wallace. Chris in Hong Kong. Chris, welcome.
How are you, George? Always welcome to get on the show. Delighted that you have somebody talking about Colin Wallace. He actually gave or visited the University of Leicester in approximately what I would deem the summer term of 1990. There were about 15 students in attendance, and we had about 3 hours of his time. He actually took us through how he was set up, etc. To me, the guy was genuine, and he did come out with some heavy-sounding stuff for people my age, in any case, in 1990 to you, which consequently the history itself has backed up to say, yeah, he was correct.
Well, it all was a grim time, Michael, wasn't it? I mean, there was a full-scale war going on. It was called low-intensity warfare, but it was pretty high low-intensity going on, and the stakes were high. The British security services were pulling out all the stops. How damaged has it left Wallace?
I mean, that is a good question. The thing is about Colin Wallace is he has an incredible amount of composure. So for me, I was just so surprised, you know, how he comes across, how credible he comes across. And he doesn't seem to me damaged, but he is very controlled, and he has an answer for everything. And so I don't think this is a question I can answer, because I think he's just too experienced about how he is able to present himself.
Perhaps he learned that as part of the tradecraft. What does he do now? I was amazed he's still alive, actually.
Yeah, he's still alive. He still lives in the same house where he was accused of having, killed Jonathan Lewis, same town. He's still working, or he was when I last spoke to him. I think he caught COVID, and I think he has had some health problems because of that. But we are kind of very much hoping that he will get better. And yeah. So.
Does he regret the nefarious role that he played in those dark days? Is he evangelical about that?
I mean, that is a very good question, and I think when you watch the film, you will realize that, you know, this is a very complex person. He's a very complex character, and there are certain things that I think he can't reconcile. I don't think he can really reconcile some of the things that he did and what the army did with, in a way, what he's saying now and what he, you know, represents now. Yeah.
So how do people see the film, Michael?
Well, the film is currently on pay-per-view, but on the big date is the 29th of September, where I will be uploading the film for free to YouTube. So I'm asking everyone to, you know, watch it after that and share it as wide as possible, because I really think this is a film and a story that needs to be seen as widely as possible.
Well, I've rented it. I'm going to watch it tonight. I think it was Vimeo. It was on. I'm very interested in the subject. Anyone that's interested in intelligence matters in Ireland, the role of Britain in Ireland, and anyone interested in the politics of Labour and the Labour movement in the 1970s will, I'm sure, find it fascinating, because Colin Wallace was involved deeply in all of that. Best of luck with it, Michael. Thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it very much, and good luck with the film.